A little bit about me. Um, I am a director of research at the IMA, which you've heard of, which is maybe a little bit of a shock. It's a shock to me because I've been an academic for almost 30 years of my life, meaning a faculty member. I have my PhD in hospitality management from Ohio State. I was a CPA to restaurants. So as I was transitioning into academia, that was a natural change. That was a natural change for me, as you might call it. But I was teaching at Otterbein in Columbus, which many of you may know about because if you're in Columbus. And then I was recruited by Youngstown State University, which was great. And I became a professor there, and I won a lot of teaching awards for innovation in teaching, actually. And I have a bunch of degrees. I have a master's degree in business administration, applied positive psychology, journalism, and creativity and change leadership. So kind of this softer skill area is in my, wheelhouse, something like that. But I also want to say, I'm also the master of many bad ideas and some good ones. So if you feel like you're not creative, you're on that end of, I don't think I'm a creative thinker. Well, I was the same way as well. And these skills can actually be taught and nurtured and grown. So I left my email there as well. If you want to get a hold of me at the IMA, feel free to email me. If you have any questions after the workshop, feel free to get a hold of me. Okay. So because what I do basically all the time is research. So also I'm going to ask for a couple volunteers if you're interested. I have an exercise for you that I created to help solve my own problems creatively. And if you would like to, we're going to be doing a worksheet. Oh, do they have that worksheet to download? Make sure they can get that.
Okay, I'll double check it. If not, we'll get it uploaded, but
Okay.
just keep an eye out. They should be in there if we had that worksheet sent over to us.
Yes, because the worksheet will really help you. And if it's written, it really helps to have it written and to print it out and to work on it. And I worked on it as well. And I'd just like to say, last time I used the worksheet, actually, I'll tell you a little about when it gets there, but an amazing thing happened when I worked on one of my own challenges. Okay, so that's a little bit more about me. I'm going to talk a little bit about the mindset of an innovative thinker. I wrote an article a couple years ago, and I visited Fidelity Investments. And so sometimes people say, well, what does creative problem solving have to do with accountants? Why do we need to know this? Well, actually, Fidelity Investments teaches every person there, something called design thinking. And the exercise we're doing today is actually a type of design thinking. So design thinking is kind of a type of creative problem solving. I don't talk about it directly, but there is a little bit in here about design thinking. But the thinking behind design thinking is actually creative problem solving. So I thought I'd mention that. Firms like Deloitte also teach people creative problem solving, design thinking, as well as the U.S. military. This is very big in the military because if you're in battle, you can't go to a guidebook. You can't pull out some playbook and just follow the rules. You have to be an innovative thinker. And generals test very high on creative thinking because they have lives at stake. So some of the people who test the highest on creative problem-solving skills are actually generals in the U.S. military. Okay, so some of you have heard certain kinds of terminology, and common terminology used is things like novelty, divergent thinking, out-of-the-box ideas. And novel ideas are those that are original, but also useful. So I want to kind of bring that in, that we just don't come up with a bunch of ideas for no reason at all. We come up with these ideas so we can use them. So the idea today is when we work on your exercise or your own challenge, so you might start thinking about that challenge, is that we want to come up with something useful, but an idea you may not have thought of. And another thing about creative thinking is that there's some risk to it. Okay. Creative thinkers tend to take risks, but not always. But these are common beliefs. But if we think about what's happening today, and some modern thought is we talk a lot about differences and different perspectives and having dialogue. And actually, there's something called the science of possibilities. So, what is and what is to come. And if we can't be creative thinkers, how can we think of possibilities? And many of you have probably used your creative thinking skills and not realized it during COVID because we had to invent a lot of things. Okay, we had to invent a new way of life, a new way of living every day. So actually, creativity is innate. And I just want to mention that because so often we think, well, we're accountants, we're not really as creative. And our polling showed that as well. If you don't think of yourself as creative, but actually creativity is innate in human beings. So I'm going to talk a little bit just about problem solving. Many of us, when we have a problem, we just stare at it. And again, these stubborn problems. Does anybody here have a problem? I don't know. I can peek at chat. I should put a polling question. Anybody here have any problems that are kind of stubborn? Well, if you have one of those problems, I hope we can work on this today. But we don't work on solving problems by staring at them. We have a different approach. So to solve a problem, instead of just staring at it, I would suggest that maybe we take a different approach and go into what we might consider more abstract thinking. And you'll be learning that as we go along, but just give me an opportunity, give me a chance to take you a little bit into a world that might be a little uncomfortable, which is abstract thinking. Okay, so here's our agenda for the day. I'm going to do some definitions. I'm going to talk about why this topic is important. We're going to have some basic lessons about the brain and how we're inclined to look at things. Then we're going to learn something called the brain dance. Don't worry, I'm not going to be having you get up and doing some sort of dance. We'll be still sitting. Then I'm going to take you through the creative problem solving process with, again, something I developed to help myself. And then I will be happy to entertain questions. And depending on our time frame, I have a lot of extra practice aids at the end. So if we have time left, we'll just go through some practice aids and practice a little more. Okay, so as for definitions. So when we think about critical thinking and creative thinking, I want to kind of go through the difference between the two. Now, in school, I taught for 30 years. We teach a lot of critical thinking, like looking at data and narrowing it, picking the best solution. So critical thinking skills are things like observation, have a lot of analysis, problem solving, and making decisions. And it's a narrowing. Okay, it's a narrowing of how we look. If we had 5 alternatives or 3 alternatives, we would narrow. Or client might say, hey, can you give me some potential solutions or potential things that could happen, even on a tax return, like what could happen if I don't amend my tax return? And then you would give them some, well, you could be audited or you might not be audited, but if you are audited, these are the penalties. Now, creative thinking is a little different. Instead of a narrowing, we're actually letting go of that and we're doing a widening, okay? We're trying to find potential solutions. But again, to have a really good potential solution, you need to have ideas. Okay, so let's say we had a map. And I don't know if you've ever driven somewhere and become lost. Now, when you're lost, you have 2 options. You can go back to where you started and stay according to the map, or you let Siri or whatever guidance tool you're doing reroute you, okay? So creative thinking is kind of like rerouting. Rather than going back, we're rerouting because there's many ways to the same destination. So the part about creativity is let's think of a lot of ways to get a solution. Let's think of a lot of ways to get to our destination. And that's why I have this is a widening. And so often we're pushed to come up with a solution, but we cannot come up with a great solution. We can come up with a solution, but we can probably come up with a better solution if we spend a little bit of time generating some ideas, and then doing a narrowing. And that is what I call the dance, which I'll get to in a minute. Okay, so why do we even care about this whole thing? Well, I don't know if you heard of Bloom's taxonomy in college, which many of you did. Some professors use it, some professors don't, but there's actually stages of thought. So the very basic stage is just remembering, okay, just remembering terminology, and then beginning to understand what those words may mean. And in accounting, we actually get to the place where finally we can analyze and evaluate as we move up the pyramid. But at the top of Bloom's taxonomy is create. And in education, I hate to say, we don't do a lot of creating. And we teach people steps, remembering, understanding, analyzing, and evaluating, but we don't teach people how to create. And I think one reason why is a lot of professors don't know how to do this. They don't really think about this. But this is something we're going to get to today, is doing some creation. And what creativity is not, it's not solely dance or art or music. This is creative expression. So that's another reason why creativity kind of gets a bad rap, as they say, don't be a creative accountant. I had a friend say, you accountants are so straight laced. We need some creativity. And that's something we're like, well, that's not necessarily what we want to do. We try to stay on this straight and narrow. But the thing is, creativity is something we need, whether it's to provide better services to our clients, whether it's to come up with solutions, whether it's in-house, or to help clients. But it's just not creative expression. So I want to make that distinction, that it goes beyond creative expression, which is like the dance and the art. And the skills we're talking about today, according to the World Economic Forum, you'll see what's going on here. Wow. In 2015, complex problem solving was the number 1 need. Critical thinking was number 4, and creativity was number 10. But in 2020, look what happened. Okay, everything that had to do with thinking skills moved to 1, 2, and 3. And then this new category came in called cognitive flexibility. So I'm going to do a little bit about cognitive flexibility today. Because if it's kind of like, nobody wants to feel stiff, right? People do exercise, but if you don't exercise those muscles, they become stiff, or they can become stiff. It's the same thing with the brain. We really need to have cognitive flexibility to be able to move in these areas of critical thinking and creative thinking. Also, number 1 skill, this is an old survey from 2010 by IBM, where they asked 1,500 chief executive officers what they saw or what they wanted, and they said they wanted creative leaders. So let me talk a little bit about why, and I think it's more important today than ever. It would be great if they redid this survey. I think the result would be the same. What does a creative leader do? They can make more business model changes, and they can invite disruptive innovation. And we hear a lot about disruption. COVID was definitely a disruptor. They can change the enterprise, are more comfortable with ambiguity. Again, that's that cognitive flexibility. Some people are very uncomfortable with ambiguity, but this is something we need to get used to if you want to be a creative thinker. They score much higher in innovation. As they change things, they alter the status quo, and they actually invent new business models. So some of you may have thought back about things to change. As someone said today, the whole problem with the internet, using your hotspot is not that innovative, but it is, something sometimes you have to think quickly to make changes, and you've probably had to do it in your own life. Without creativity, we probably will not even survive, because we do have to think of things to change things depending on the circumstances. So we have a little bit of a crisis. In education, everybody says our students are not creative thinkers or critical thinkers. They don't even get to creative thinkers. They're like, your students aren't, they're lacking critical thinking skills. Why can't they think? And of course, we don't teach much about creative thinking either in education. It's almost zero, unless you're at some special school that specializes in this type of thing. But I also want to mention that you see on the top of Bloom's taxonomy of thinking, you see these evaluative skills at the top of the pyramid, as well as creativity. These are things that take time to develop, for sure. And you're not, it's not kind of inborn. To be a good critical thinker, you have to have knowledge, right? You have to have competency to make these decisions. And we do work on that with students. And there's also a thing, I'll mention this, some brain science, that forgetting is part of learning, believe it or not. So you may learn something today and you'll leave the seminar and somebody will say, how was the conference? And you'll say, oh yeah, it was really good. And then they're like, what did you learn? And you'll be like, well, I learned something. I just can't pull it out right now. That's because our brain, when it learns, it takes it in, and your brain works on organizing things. And when you sleep, actually, it does a lot behind the scenes. And then a day later or 2 days later, if you have another seminar on something or another topic, it comes back. And this is the way our brain learns. So, when it comes to changing context or asking someone a question very quickly, sometimes they can't just spit it out. It takes a while to develop, those neural pathways, which are part of learning, as well as developing expertise, which can take up to 10 years to develop expertise. Doesn't mean it takes 10 years to be a critical thinker, creative thinker, but many of you, if you've been in a profession for 10 years, your expertise, you're probably an expert in your area.